The dying star Kepler 442 cast long shadows across the wreckage of what was once the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. Ambassador Veltar stood on the bridge of the Harmony's end, watching through the viewport as twisted metal and shattered dreams floated past in the cold vacuum of space. His forearms shook as he prepared to send what might be the last message the Galactic Council would ever transmit. The bridge around him was a mess of sparking consoles and flickering lights. Bodies of his crew members lay where they had fallen, their peaceful faces showing no understanding of the horror that had consumed them. The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for over 10,000 years through diplomacy, trade, and careful negotiation. They had built a civilization based on mutual respect and shared knowledge. War was something they read about in ancient history. Books, not something they lived through. But the Void Swarm didn't care about their peaceful intentions. Veltar had seen the recordings from the first attacks. The swarm moved like a living nightmare across the galaxy, consuming entire worlds in days. They didn't negotiate or communicate. They simply devoured everything organic in their path, growing stronger with each meal. Billions of peaceful beings had simply vanished, their life force absorbed into the growing mass of dark ships that blocked out the stars themselves. The Council's response had been exactly what anyone would expect from a civilization that hadn't fought a real war in millennia. They had tried to reason with the creatures. They had attempted diplomatic contact. They had even offered tribute and safe passage through their space. The swarm had responded by eating their ambassadors. Military action was their last resort, and it had been a disaster from the start. Council ships were designed for exploration and research, not combat. Their weapons were meant for clearing asteroids and mining operations, not fighting an enemy that seemed to regenerate faster than they could damage it. Their shields were built to protect against cosmic radiation, not the bioweapons that dissolved matter at the molecular level. The great battle of Proxima Centauri had lasted less than 6 hours. 300 Council vessels had been reduced, 2 floating scrap metal, while the swarm had barely slowed down. The survivors spoke in whispers about ships that screamed as they died, their hulls writhing like living tissue as the swarm consumed them from the inside out. Now Veltar was alone in what remained of Council space, broadcasting a plea that felt like surrender. His voice cracked as he spoke into the quantum relay, knowing that most species who might receive his message had already fallen silent or fled to the far edges of the galaxy. The peaceful Etherians had retreated to their home dimension, sealing the doorways behind them. The logical Christek had run their calculations and decided that cultural preservation was more important than fighting a war. They couldn't win. But then something unexpected happened. A response came from a tiny solar system that the Council had barely noticed. A single blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. The voice was rough and confident in a way that sent chills down Veltar's spine. "This is Admiral Jack Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force. We got your message. Help is coming." Veltar checked his records with trembling hands. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, a planet so violent and dangerous that intelligent life should never have survived long enough to develop space travel. The Council's surveys described it as a nightmare world where massive predators hunted smaller creatures, where the weather itself could kill, and where the dominant species had somehow evolved from persistence hunters who chased their prey to exhaustion across vast distances. These humans had apparently fought wars against each other for their entire recorded history. They had weapons designed specifically to kill other intelligent beings. They had tactical doctrines built around concepts like acceptable losses and total war that made Council philosophers sick to their stomachs. By all reasonable standards, they should have destroyed themselves long before they reached the stars. But maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needed now. Maybe it would take monsters to fight monsters. The space around Kepler Station erupted in brilliant flashes of light as the human fleet tore through hyperspace like bullets through paper. Veltar had seen thousands of ships arrive at the station over his lifetime, but nothing had prepared him for this moment, where Council vessels emerged gracefully from hyperspace with smooth transitions and elegant curves. The human ships burst into normal space like they were angry about having to slow down. Admiral Morrison's flagship, the Redemption, dominated the view from the station's observation deck. The ship looked nothing like the peaceful exploration vessels that usually docked here. Its hull was covered in weapon batteries that stuck out at aggressive angles, giving it the appearance of a metal predator showing its teeth. Gun turrets tracked back and forth constantly, as if searching for something to shoot. The ship's armor was scarred and dented, telling stories of battles that Council ships were never designed to survive. Behind the flagship came wave after wave of human warships, each one more intimidating than the last. The Retribution looked like it had been built specifically to ram things, its front end shaped like a massive spear point. The Last Stand bristled with so many missile tubes that Veltar couldn't count them all. The Necessary Evil, actually, made him take a step back from the viewport, its dark hull seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. What disturbed Veltar most was the names themselves. Council ships had names like Peaceful Journey, and Harmony's Dream, and Understanding's Light. These human vessels bore titles that spoke of violence and death as casually as discussing the weather. Who named a ship Necessary Evil, and then went to sleep peacefully at night? The meeting room aboard the station felt smaller once the humans arrived. Admiral Morrison walked in like he owned the place, his uniform crisp, despite the obvious signs of recent combat. Scars crossed his face in a pattern that suggested he had survived things that would have killed most council members instantly. His eyes moved constantly, checking corners and exits like he expected an attack at any moment. Captain Lisa Hayes followed close behind him, and Veltar found her even more unsettling than her commander. Where Morrison looked like a warrior, Hayes looked like someone who enjoyed the fighting. She smiled too much, and too easily, especially when discussing topics that made other species uncomfortable. Her casual attitude toward violence made Veltar skin crawl. The rest of the human delegation filled the room with an energy that the peaceful council chambers had never experienced. They moved with purpose and confidence, their hands never straying far from weapons that would have been considered barbaric by galactic standards. Everything about them screamed danger to species that had evolved past the need for violence. When Veltar welcomed them to the war, Captain Hayes actually laughed out loud. It wasn't a pleasant sound. The laugh held no warmth or humor, just a dark amusement that suggested she found the very concept of galactic warfare to be some kind of joke. Her response about pest control sent chills through every council representative. In the room, the humans spoke about death like it was a simple fact of life. They discussed casualty rates the way council members talked about supply logistics. When they mentioned collateral damage parameters, they weren't expressing concern about innocent bystanders. They were calculating how much destruction was acceptable to achieve their goals. These concepts were so foreign to council thinking that several representatives had to leave the room. Veltar tried to maintain some level of control over the situation by suggesting coordination with existing defensive strategies. The council had spent decades developing careful defensive formations, designed to minimize casualties while protecting civilian populations. Their tactics were based on thousands of years of peaceful conflict resolution. Admiral Morrison's flat refusal wasn't unexpected, but his reasoning was. Defensive formations would get them eaten alive, he said. The Void Swarm had already proven that defensive thinking led to extinction. Instead of trying to protect what they had, the humans planned to hunt down and destroy the threat at its source. As Veltar watched these strange creatures plan their campaign, he realized that the galaxy had invited wolves to solve their sheep problem. The question now was whether the cure would prove worse than the disease. The alarm klaxons aboard the Harmony's end screamed their warning as the Void Swarm emerged from the asteroid field like a living nightmare. Veltar watched through the tactical display as hundreds of bioships swarmed toward their position, their organic hulls pulsing with sickly bioluminescence. This was exactly how every previous engagement had started, with Council forces preparing for an orderly retreat to minimize casualties. But this time was different. This time, the humans were here. Commander Mike Torres didn't wait for orders from the flagship. The moment the swarm appeared on his sensors, he pushed the Thunder Bay to full throttle and aimed straight for the largest bioship in the enemy formation. His crew didn't question the order or ask for clarification. They simply strapped themselves in and prepared for impact. Veltar couldn't believe what he was seeing. The Thunder Bay wasn't trying to engage the enemy at a safe distance like any sane commander would do. Torres was actually accelerating toward the massive creature, his ship's engines burning so bright they lit up the surrounding space like a small star. The bioship tried to turn away, but it was too late. The collision happened in complete silence, the vacuum of space swallowing the sound of metal tearing through living tissue. The Thunder Bay punched through the bioship's outer hull like a bullet through soft flesh, disappearing completely inside the creature's body. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire bioship erupted in nuclear fire as Torres detonated his ship's reactor from the inside. Captain Hayes watched the explosion through her visor, her voice steady and professional as she reported to Admiral Morrison. When she mentioned that Torres had just died taking out a Class 7 organism, her tone was the same as if she was reporting the weather. Morrison's response was even more disturbing. He was pleased with the result and wanted Torres' replacement to keep doing the same thing. This was insanity by any civilized standard. The humans were using their own ships as guided missiles, sacrificing entire crews to take out single targets. But somehow, it was working. The bioship that had taken 3 Council cruisers to damage was now floating dead in space, its bioluminescent patterns fading to black. The rest of the human fleet followed Torres' example with terrifying efficiency. The destroyer Reckless collided with another bioship at full speed, its crew detonating their ammunition stores at the moment of impact. The cruiser Final Answer used its damaged engines as improvised bombs, ramming them into swarm vessels before the reactors went critical. What made it worse was how casual the humans were about the whole thing. They discussed these suicide attacks like they were discussing lunch plans. When the Defiant lost its main weapons, Captain Rodriguez simply ordered his crew to evacuate in escape pods before steering the ship directly into a cluster of enemy vessels. But the real horror began when Colonel Beth Parker's Marines started boarding the bioships. Veltar had seen Council boarding actions before. Careful operations with full environmental suits and backup teams, designed to capture enemy vessels with minimal damage. The human Marines did something completely different. They cut their way into living ships with plasma torches and explosives, fighting through environments that would have killed most species instantly. Parker's team carved through digestive chambers filled with acid, navigated nerve clusters that sparked with bioelectric energy, and planted fusion charges in what could only be described as the creature's hearts. The radio chatter from these boarding operations was unlike anything Veltar had ever heard. Parker's Marines joked about the smell while fighting for their lives inside alien monsters. They gave their weapons nicknames and talked about the bioships like they were hunting dangerous animals for sport rather than fighting for the survival of galactic civilization. Lieutenant Dan Walsh reported finding the creature's brain center, while simultaneously complaining that the organic corridors were too slippery for proper footing. Sergeant Amy Foster described planting charges in what she called the creature's stomach, while making jokes about indigestion. These humans were treating Mortal Kombat like some kind of twisted adventure. The Void Swarm had evolved specifically to overwhelm civilized species. Their tactics were designed to break organized resistance through sheer numbers and biological horror, but they had never encountered an enemy that embraced chaos as a battle strategy. The humans turned every disadvantage into an opportunity, every retreat into a trap. When the smoke cleared from the first engagement, 12 bioships floated dead in space, while the human fleet regrouped for the next attack. The humans had lost 6 ships and over 3,000 personnel, casualties. That would have devastated any council fleet. Morrison's only comment was that they were ahead of schedule. Fleet Commander Zix had witnessed countless battles during his 3 centuries of service, but nothing had prepared him for watching humans fight. From his command ship's observation deck, he studied the tactical displays with growing horror and fascination. These creatures didn't just engage the enemy. They seemed to enjoy it in ways that made his scales crawl. His aide trembled beside him as another human ship executed what could only be described as a controlled crash into a bioship, twice its size. The humans called it a tactical ramming maneuver, but Zix knew madness when he saw it. Except this madness was winning battles that had destroyed entire council fleets. What terrified Zix most was realizing that the humans weren't actually insane. Every seemingly suicidal attack was carefully planned and executed with military precision that spoke of centuries of practice. These tactics weren't desperate last stands, they were standard operating procedures that had been refined through countless wars against other humans. Captain Tom Bradley's squadron demonstrated this perfectly during the Battle of the Helix Nebula, when 50 bioships surrounded his 12 vessels. Any sane commander would have tried to break through the encirclement and escape to fight another day. Instead, Bradley ordered his ships to move closer together and wait for the enemy to close in. Zix watched in stunned silence as the human ships formed a perfect sphere, their weapon systems pointing outward in every direction. The expecting their prey to panic and scatter, moved in for what should have been an easy kill. Instead, they flew directly into a 3-dimensional kill zone, where every angle was covered by overlapping fields of fire. The maneuver was called Hannibal's Gambit, named after some ancient human general who had used similar tactics against his own species. The fact that humans had been perfecting these strategies by fighting each other for thousands of years explained why they were so devastatingly effective against alien enemies. The Void Swarm's hive mind was designed to coordinate against logical, predictable opponents. It had no answer for creatures that turned being surrounded into an advantage. Lieutenant Commander Amy Foster had developed tactics that pushed the boundaries of what Zix considered possible. Her specialty was something the humans called ghost ship operations, where she used the wreckage of destroyed vessels as camouflage and mobile bases. Foster's teams would hide inside dead hulks, drifting closer to swarm formations before launching surprise attacks from what appeared to be harmless debris. Zix had watched Foster's Marines cut their way out of a destroyed frigate and into an unsuspecting bioship, planting fusion charges throughout the creature's nervous system before it even realized it was under attack. The motto painted on Foster's armor summed up the human approach to warfare in a way that chilled Zix to his core. Death smiles at us all. We smile back. These humans didn't just accept death as a possibility, they embraced it as a tactical tool. They used their own mortality as a weapon, calculating exactly how many lives they were willing to spend to achieve each objective. Council commanders spent months planning operations to minimize casualties, while human officers factored acceptable losses into their battle plans as casually as calculating fuel consumption. The difference became clear when Zix studied the humans' training records. Every other spacefaring species had developed their military doctrines by fighting pirates, defending against natural disasters, or engaging in limited territorial disputes. Humans had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting other humans, creatures just as intelligent, just as ruthless, and just as willing to die for their cause. Human military academies taught courses on topics like asymmetric warfare, total war doctrine, and acceptable collateral damage that would have been considered war crimes by galactic standards. Their officers studied historical battles where entire cities had been destroyed, where millions died for strategic advantage, where victory was measured not by territory gained, but by enemies eliminated. Colonel Jake Peterson's assault on the swarm's forward base exemplified this approach, where Council forces would have attempted a surgical strike to minimize damage to the surrounding area. Peterson's Marines simply planted nuclear charges throughout the entire asteroid field and detonated everything at once. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away, and it eliminated not just the base, but every swarm organism within 100,000 kilometers. When questioned about the massive destruction, Peterson simply shrugged and pointed out that dead enemies couldn't regroup and attack later. This pragmatic approach to violence was something the Void Swarm had never encountered before. Every other species they had fought tried to preserve life and limit destruction. Humans treated war like a problem to be solved through the most efficient application of overwhelming force. The swarm's biological advantages meant nothing against opponents who had spent millennia learning to kill the galaxy's most dangerous predators, other humans. Every human tactic, from boarding actions to fleet maneuvers, assumed they were fighting enemies as smart and vicious as themselves. Against creatures evolved to overwhelm peaceful civilizations, this experience proved devastatingly effective. As Zix watched another human victory unfold on his screens, he realized the galaxy had made a deal with devils to save itself from demons. The final battle lasted 18 hours and left entire star systems permanently scarred. When Admiral Morrison's flagship Redemption delivered the killing blow to the Void Swarm's central nexus, the creature's death scream tore through space-time, itself creating ripples that would be felt across 17 different dimensions for centuries to come. The massive bioentity that had consumed countless worlds simply ceased to exist, taking with it every connected organism in the swarm's vast network. Veltar stood on the observation deck of what remained of Galactic Council headquarters, watching debris fields that had once been the galaxy's greatest threat drift past his viewport. The war was over. The Void Swarm was extinct. Every civilized species in the galaxy should have been celebrating their salvation. Instead, Veltar felt a growing sense of dread as he prepared for the victory ceremony. The ceremony itself was unlike anything the Council had ever hosted. Instead of the usual diplomatic protocols and lengthy speeches about cooperation and peace, the humans had organized what they called a mission debrief. Military officers from across the human fleet presented casualty reports, damage assessments, and strategic analyses with the same clinical efficiency they had shown during the war. Admiral Morrison stood at the podium in his dress uniform, looking every inch the conquering hero. His speech was brief and to the point, thanking the Council for their cooperation and announcing that human forces would remain in the area to ensure continued security. The way he said it made it sound like a generous offer, rather than a declaration of permanent occupation. Veltar had hoped that the humans would simply return to their distant homeworld once the threat was eliminated. After all, Earth was still classified as a dangerous death world that most species preferred to avoid. Surely these violent creatures would want to go back to their own territory and leave the galaxy's civilized regions in peace. But General Robert Stone's smile told a different story. The commander of what the humans called their peacekeeping forces had the look of a predator who had found a comfortable hunting ground and had no intention of leaving. When Veltar politely suggested that continued human presence wasn't necessary, Stone's response was both logical and terrifying. The general was right, of course. The Council had proven completely incapable of defending itself against a single major threat. What would happen when the next crisis arose? The galaxy was full of dangerous species, rogue artificial intelligences, and cosmic phenomena that could threaten civilized life. Without human protection, the Council worlds would be helpless against any future aggressor. Within months of the victory, human warships had established permanent patrol routes along every major trade corridor in former Council space. Captain Jennifer Walsh's task force built what they called security stations at strategic points throughout the galaxy, each one bristling with enough firepower to level a planet. These weren't temporary bases. They were permanent installations designed to project human power across vast distances. Colonel David Reed's Marines became a common sight on Council worlds, providing what the humans termed advisory services to local governments. These advisors had helpful suggestions about everything from defense spending to trade policies, and their recommendations always seemed to align perfectly with human interests. Governments that followed their advice prospered under Terran protection. Those that didn't faced unfortunate accidents and equipment failures that made cooperation suddenly seem much more attractive. The transformation of galactic society was swift and comprehensive. Trade routes that had been dangerous for millennia became safe overnight under human protection. Pirates and raiders who had plagued shipping lanes for centuries simply disappeared, their fleets reduced to drifting wreckage by human patrol squadrons. Border disputes between species were resolved quickly and permanently. When human mediators arrived with their characteristic diplomatic approach, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision, the results were undeniably positive. Galactic commerce reached levels not seen since the golden age of the early Council. Scientific research flourished under human security guarantees. Art and culture experienced a renaissance as species no longer needed to devote resources to defense, by any objective measure. The galaxy was more prosperous and peaceful than it had been in thousands of years, but Veltar understood the true cost of this peace. The humans hadn't liberated the galaxy from the Void Swarm, they had simply replaced one form of domination with another. The difference was that this new overlord was intelligent, organized, and genuinely convinced that their rule was beneficial for everyone involved. As he watched another human patrol fleet pass by his office window, Veltar realized that the galaxy's desperate call for help had been answered exactly as requested. The humans had saved them all from extinction. They just hadn't mentioned that salvation came with a permanent management contract written in the blood of their enemies. The Deathworlders had kept their promise. They had ended the threat and brought peace to the galaxy. The fact that they defined peace as everyone doing what humans tell them to do was apparently just a minor detail. They hadn't bothered to explain during the initial negotiations.